Capango is one of our newer preferred vendors, and we're super excited to be hearing all about their product and what it can do for you and your business. So, Stefan, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and then take it away.
Well, thanks very much, Kate. Excited to be here this afternoon, and thank you all for taking a few minutes out of your day. I'm sure it's busy. It's right after the lunch hour rush, and so I'm sure you're busy, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes. We've got a lot of content to go over today, and I think some exciting updates on both employment stats and information in Ohio, and some recruiting strategies and some things you can do as you look at finding the best candidates for your business. So we're going to go through quite a few slides here, and then at the very end, we'll have a Q&A session, and we'll open it up a little bit, and we can do that. And Kate, I forgot to ask, can they make questions? Are you monitoring a chat feature?
Yes, we have the Q&A and chat. So if you put a question in either place, we'll be able to answer that at the end.
Perfect. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, just 30 seconds on Capango. So we are an hourly recruiting platform, very focused on just the restaurant, retail, hourly employee segment. So unlike a lot of other platforms that you might work with, we are very focused on your industry and on the hourly labor segment, because as we'll describe a little bit as we go through today, hiring hourly labor is different than hiring your next manager, your next franchise supervisor. And so when we think about what we're doing at Capango, we don't want to be just a recruiting platform. We really want to focus our attention on connecting amazing people with great opportunities and doing a better job at finding them the best opportunity. I'm sort of the poster child for this. I started my career in restaurants, as many of you probably did. I was flipping burgers at an A&W restaurant, and that was my first ever job. And so we want to take those opportunities for first-time job seekers and find them success in the industry and find them careers, not just temporary employment. So today, as we go through the session, we're going to talk about three main things. We'll go over some workforce stats and some really updated information on the status of workforce and employment in Ohio. And then we're going to talk about the recruiting challenge. We did research at 3 different universities and really talked extensively with those universities about the recruiting challenge. What's working, what's not working, and very particularly, what does Gen Z think about it? What does those new people that are coming into the workforce think about the recruiting challenge? And then the last segment that we're going to do is a little bit on engaging your workforce, because as we know, recruiting is obviously a challenge for everybody, but keeping them engaged and reducing your turnover is also important. So we'll talk about that a bit as well. So very quick stat about the industry we all represent. So in Ohio, $28 billion in annual sales. It's a huge driver of the Ohio economy. 23,000 locations in the state, over 500,000 employees. So really the third largest employer in Ohio. So the industry that you're participating in has a significant impact on the state and what's going on in the state. And as we look at it and looking at news over the last few months, you're seeing this in your business. I'm sure that's probably why you're on this webinar today. It's a challenge, right? And so whether it's hiring and retaining back of house staff, the challenges that are seeing there, whether it's overall struggling. Certainly in November, there was an article about immigration policy and how that might affect our industry. And certainly in the last couple of weeks, we've seen lots of noise about that, and I think it's yet to be determined. What is that going to impact on our industry? What's the impact of that to our industry? And then when we look at overall restaurants, what we're seeing is over 30% saying this is their number one challenge, while 27% say that retention was their challenge. So those two things make up a significant challenge for operating and running your services day to day. So when we look at the U.S. workforce as a whole, we'll take it up just a little bit and look at the workforce. The challenge we're having across the entire U.S. workforce is right now there are 1.3 million openings between restaurants and retail. And I combine restaurants and retail sometimes when I talk to audiences because our data shows that registered job seekers looking for employment, 60% of them that register with us say that they would take a retail or a restaurant job. And we certainly saw during COVID, employees were moving back and forth between the industries. And you may have seen that. And maybe as your restaurant perhaps closed down or reduced staff, they went and worked nighttime at stores and trying to help pack shelves. And then as that decreased, they came back into the industry again. So we think that when we think about employment stats, it's important to look at both the retail and the restaurant segments. And hospitality obviously struggling to fill open positions. So what does that look like in a broader scale? So again, this is comparing the two industries. Retail, about 15.7 million jobs in the United States market versus restaurants and hospitality, about 17 million. So just slightly smaller for retail. They have a slower or a slightly smaller turnover rate. We would expect that given the types of industry we're in. But the big point here, there's really 2 points. One is it's costing employers $13 billion to recruit and onboard these employees. And so that's a significant draw down on your ability to be profitable. But also, it's important to remember, again, 1 in 4 jobs in the US market is reliant on these industries. So we're a critical driver in the employment segment. When we look at employment trends, a couple of things to look at. So on the left-hand side here, total Ohio jobs, and congrats. I mean, we hear lots of information about is the economy good? Is the economy not good? What's going on? The reality is, we just hit in Ohio record high of 5.7 million employees working in the industry, in the state rather. And in the industry specifically, just slightly less than that, the peak of over 500,000 employees in there. So when you're thinking about hiring in your location, there's really 500,000 workers or 566,000 workers in there. And that's just below the all-time high that was back in 2020. So it's a big workforce, and it's growing and continuing to expand. When we look at it from an unemployment perspective, the unemployment rate back in November was 4.3%. And that's up a little bit from a really staggering low 3.3% in 2023, in June 2023. But really, when you look at it, that 1 percentage point isn't a big difference. So when you're trying to hire people, that's a challenge in that 4.3% is almost the equivalent of full employment. And I had a look at the stats for the workforce, the participation of workforce in the state as well, because sometimes people say, well, that's because not everybody is registered. And the reality is the participation rate in the workforce in Ohio is almost where it has been for the last 20 years, maybe slightly down by a few points over the last couple of years, but over 64% of available people that are at the age to work are participating in the workforce. And that historically, going back over decades, has not moved a whole lot. So you're competing there. On the other side of the coin, it's an opportunity. There still are, in the unemployment rolls, 255,000 people looking for jobs in Ohio. So there is a pool out there, and our challenge is to go find that pool and engage with them. Sometimes when I do this presentation, I've had people come back and say, well, this was all a result of COVID and the industry changes that happened after COVID. But the reality is we started looking at this data before COVID. So I'll just make this point in saying the challenge of finding hourly workers has been going on for now 6 or 7 years. It's something that has been going on for quite a while. Employers have said to us consistently they're challenged by not having qualified workers. They're having workers come in, but maybe not the qualified ones they want. And there's a lacking of a pipeline structure to grow the candidate pool. And what I mean by that is we don't want to be just trading workers across the street. We want to find ways to bring workers into our industry, to engage them into our industry and keep them in our industry. And so we want that pipeline structure, whether it's out of schools or out of training programs, to constantly be bringing people into the industry. Turnover is high. Anytime the unemployment rate drops to 4.3%, the turnover rate is going to go up a little bit more because people have choices. And so you just have to be aware of that. And the end result of this, recruiting is time consuming and expensive. When we did our research, one of the things that came back that was really staggering to us is looking at the technology, looking at Gen Z, looking at how people behave in the recruiting process. 60% of job seekers stop filling out a job application because the was too long. Particularly with Gen Z, they have a really amazingly short attention span. So you really have to think about in your process, how are you engaging with those people and how are you moving them through the pipeline, whether it's filling out the job application or just getting them into your pipeline, or whether it's dealing with them once they're in the pipeline. You really have to think about speed and the ability to move them through quickly. If you have a job application that's trying to gather a whole lot of information on the very first touch point, that's a barrier to entry, and you're going to see people start that but not finish it. So part of the job that when we went out to the universities and engaged with the students and really talked to them and spent time with them and said, tell us a little bit about your first job search, tell us a little bit about the experience and so on. What we found was this frustration level with, I just didn't have the ability to find a job that I was excited about. And, as I was looking, it was a really frustrating process. And so what they might have said is they just hate the job search process. And I'm going to say that 2 or 3 times today, in that many employers look at the job search process from their perspective, right? What is it that they're doing in their business, and how does that process work for them? How does this pipeline work? How much time did they spend on finding employees and managing the pipeline? But what we've heard from the job seekers is they really, really dislike the process, and they dislike the challenge of trying to find jobs that are a good match. And especially as we look at some of the bigger players in the industry that are trying to be everything to everybody, then it becomes a challenge to try and find the right opportunity for a person to get a good match and get them into a place where they'll be successful. And then they told us repeatedly that the process of applying for a job, and the example I use is in the little community I'm in, I went out and talked to 22 different employers, and they were restaurant employers and retail employers. And in talking to them, they had 19 different processes for me to apply for a job. So if I was trying to go down the street and apply for work at those places, I had 19 different places that I had to sign up. I had to use a user ID, I had to get a password and try and sign up. And that just completely is broken from the job seeker's perspective. So the bottom line here is, while you're very often focused on what the process is inside your business and how you're moving a candidate through, the job seekers just absolutely hate the process. So we want to think about that and think about how do we make a better process to get more people through successfully. So one of the big things that did pop out, and this is something, it's one of the key points that I think you should think about today, is that social tech and the ability to work with mobile solutions is really driving expectations. And the reason I say that, and the data is here, 98% of Gen Z have a mobile phone, and they spend over 6 hours a day on their phone. If you've got young adults in your family, you're seeing this, right? They're on their phone all the time. 79% of the candidates are using social, and that social interaction, whether it's Instagram or whatever other tool that they use, that social interaction is actually driving their expectation on how they think tools should work on a mobile phone. So if you have a recruiting process that is go to our website and fill out a form, and sometimes I'll have employers say to me, well, yeah, our form will actually present itself on a mobile phone. There's a difference between a form that's a web form that just happens to present itself on a mobile phone versus a form that was built to be displayed on a mobile phone. So think about your recruiting process and how that top of the funnel is going to engage with that employee candidate. Is it mobile friendly? And is it really doing the things that they would expect when they think about their interactions with social? So one of the things that's very common is, if, for instance, swiping right to say yes to something, swiping left to say no to something. Those types of interactions, and how can you do that on a phone quickly in your recruiting process? And we spent some time really looking at that and thinking about that and working with what we call human factors engineers to design and think about ways that you can move a candidate into the pipeline more easily. At the same time, top of the funnel, thinking about your candidate funnel, think about where your outreach is and how you're reaching out to them. If they're spending all that time on social and on social platforms, then your outreach to them has to be on social platforms. And it has to be in a way that engages them the way they think they should be engaged, right? It's a very much entertainment focused kind of audience out there today. And so when we think about it, we're thinking about one, are you targeting the audience properly and going after the right audience and saying, hey, what are we doing? And then two, are you presenting yourself in a way that they're going to respond? And so we spent a lot of time thinking about this and looking at this and how do you create. And one of the things that is important in our partnership with the Restaurant Association is focusing on the industry versus just getting somebody a job, but focusing on people that really want to work in the restaurant industry, want to work in the hospitality industry, want to create careers in the industry. So as you're thinking about outreach to these audiences, think about your personality of your business. Unfortunately, these are some videos that I can play. Unfortunately, I think the audio, we're still having some challenges getting the audio to play. I'm going to play the video so you can see the video. It's not nearly as impactful as what the audio is, but the whole point here is thinking about your job candidate experience and engaging with those candidates in a fun, lighthearted way to get them into the pipeline. So think about how that works in your business. Now that's an ad that we happen to create, and you can create your own and find ways to be creative in it. Here's another one that's a quick little one. And again, these are video segments that play on social media because that's where we know these job seekers are hanging out. So these again they're short, they're brief, they're industry specific, they're a little bit fun, they're kind of catchy. And the attempt there is we need somebody to get them into the top of the pipeline for candidates and move them through. Once we've got them in the top of the pipeline, this is the second most important point from our perspective, is really thinking about that job posting and thinking about what are they seeing when they click on your job, whether it's on your website, whether it's a posting that you've put out on social media, whether you put it out on one of the platforms out there, the job boards out there, wherever you put it, think really hard about the creation of that posting. A lot of companies tend to make a posting that looks like the job description. It looks like their HR department or lawyers wrote the posting. And the reality is at the top of the funnel, when you're trying to get candidates to just click and get them engaged with you, you want to really do it more like an advertising campaign. You want to really appeal to them. The way I think about it is in many of your businesses, you may have a marketing department and you think about how you outreach to your customers. What's the way you present your business, your restaurant, your hospitality organization to your customers? Take that same thought process and think about how do you present yourself to a job candidate? So 5 tips that we think are really important. Number one, again, Gen Z, short attention span. They really look very quickly and make a decision in 5 or 10 seconds whether they want to continue reading something. So a short, catchy job description, something that gets their eye, not just a short order cook needed kind of title. And then right away after that, why is this a great job? So, there's going to be other organizations out there that are going to have their postings, and a candidate's going to see many of those postings. What can you say in the second sentence or the third sentence that's really why this is a great job? We're going to talk a little bit more about the third point here, your company values. Especially with Gen Z, we're seeing a bigger focus now on them wanting to work for companies that have values that represent what their values are. Whatever they are, stating that upfront and being really upfront about what's your company like and what are your goals as a company. And then lastly, we're still surprised at the number of people that put job postings out and don't put the salary. And we think that's a mistake. One, we know through data that you will get more candidates responding when you put your salary range in. Some people think that if they put the salary range in, maybe that limits the responses. And what we've seen is the exact opposite. When you put the salary range in, people understand where you are and responses actually go up because you'll actually identify the candidates you want. And that's the other more important point here is when you put the salary range in a posting, you actually get the candidates who have already mentally said, okay, I can live with that, right? And do it as a range, have a bottom and a top, but allow them to see that so that they can self-select into your opportunity. What you don't want to do is waste time with them registering and then finding out either they think that they should be earning more or whatever else and wasting everybody's time. And then the last point here, really thinking upfront when you're hiring somebody, how do you help them advance and create success? When we talked to candidates, one of the things we clearly saw was a lot of people not just looking for a job, but how do they get advanced? And really important as you think about retention, we're going to talk about that. How do you drive retention through strategies on advancement and success? So conveying your mission is one of the points that I mentioned earlier. And Pizza is a local or a firm that you may or may not know. But one of the things that they've done is they've just made this an anchor on everything they do to the point that I went and grabbed a pizza from one of them a few months ago. And on the pizza box, it said, "We love our employees." And they really, really reinforce that their employees are such a critical part of their business. If you've read articles on them, you may or may not have seen it. They've got employees that are actually getting tattoos of the And Pizza's logo on, and creating this tribe kind of mentality. They've had people that get married in their shops and so on. But what they're doing is really saying, this is who we are and this is who we want to be. And this is where you can create a great career. It's something to think about as you think about how do you present yourself to candidates. You might not want to go this far, but you can see the range that's out there. The other thing that we're seeing, especially in Gen Z, and this is more prevalent in Gen Z than any other employee pool that has come through the business in the last 40 years, is they are really values driven. They don't want to just have a job. They really want to understand the employer. They're really following up on employers that have good community engagements. Inclusiveness and diversity is certainly a big topic in the last few weeks, as we've seen. But for Gen Z, it's an important factor. So it's not one that you should ignore. Companies that are socially responsible or have sustainability goals. So what are your goals? How do you explain your values to your job candidates? Again, I can't emphasize enough, Gen Z has a substantially higher buy-in to this type of communication than any other generation that we've seen. So let's take the conversation a little different. And this was a bit of a surprise as we did our research, and it was really amazing as we worked on it and kind of thought about it. When we were out looking at employers and the employment process and how candidates got through the pipeline, we started to look at the resume and how an employer uses a resume. And I think it's important that, again, very focused on the retail, restaurant and hospitality business, very focused on hourly labor. And what does that resume mean to them? And what we discovered was two big barriers. One, the biggest barrier of all was first job candidates. We know that retail, restaurants, hospitality are the first job for many, many, many people. It's the first time to get work experience. It's the first time to get out there and get a paycheck and so on. And when they go to a website where it says, hey, drop your resume in here, and it's the second question on the website, that's a problem for them because they don't have a resume, or they're not sure what to put on a resume. They haven't worked before, they haven't got experience and so on. So they really struggle with it. Career workers have the same challenge. Career workers, if you've got a server that's been in the industry, maybe they're a great server, they've been in the industry, they really love what they do, but they're not good at writing a resume. They're not good at creating a document. And so when we looked at it, we actually decided that First of all, we took a strategy that said, well, we're just not going to deal with resumes at all. But we found that employers really are comfortable having a document that summarizes the skills in the candidate. And so what we did, a different approach, we decided that we're not going to let somebody upload a resume to our platform because that brings in what we call resume bias. You start to look at the resume that's presented better than the one that's not before you look at the data on it. And so what we did was said, don't upload a resume. In our platform, we decided to have them fill out the information and hit a button, and we'll generate a resume for them. So you don't have to do that in your business. You can think about how you do it. But what I will caution you to do is really think carefully about how you use that document. Are you using it to get data and identify and compare candidates based on the data, or are you using it to compare how they did a Word document? And we would encourage you to be very focused on the data. And then the other thing is really focusing on your recruiting process to be different between either first-time employees, entry-level employees versus manager employees. Clearly a different recruiting experience, a different process that you should go through. You should think about that in your world. How's that different to find that first-time employee versus when I'm looking for a supervisor, a shift supervisor, or a manager, or whatever you're looking for. The last thing that we actually did was we looked at hundreds of job applications and looked at employers that were recruiting and tried to dissect what the information was that they were really making decisions on. And what we discovered was there was really two categories that were critical. And think about this as you think about your decision process. The categories are powers and passions. So what we mean by that is a power is something that the candidate brings to you and brings to your employee organization. So powers being, I've got a high school diploma, maybe I've got 3 years experience, maybe I've got a reliable car, maybe I can lift 50 pounds because they're moving stuff. Those are powers. Those are tactical things that you can make decisions on. And those are really easy things to use to work through and make decisions on. Passions are what you need to discover about that individual. What are they passionate about? Are they passionate about food? Are they passionate about wine? Do they love engaging with people? Should they be front of house or back of house? And so think about it a little differently as you think about what do they bring as far as powers to your organization, and then what passions do they bring? How do we bring out those passions and make them successful by putting them in roles where those passions are shown? All of that to be said, and this is another Gen Z category, but it's important in the recruiting process. Is it candidate friendly, but is it time consuming? And so we've seen a lot of instances where employers are doing a great job at putting their postings out there and so on. And I just had a look at some data this afternoon. Hey, how many people had clicked on jobs in our platform and how many times had the employer responded? And we see a gap there where people are saying, hey, I'm interested in this job, and employers aren't doing a good job at responding. So again, if you think about these candidates, very often they're applying at several places at the same time. So it becomes a bit of a competition, right? Who can find that candidate the right role and get them into their organization the fastest? So think about when you're doing it, how do you take that candidate and immediately respond? If somebody swiped right on your job or applied and hit that apply button on your website, how do you respond to them in minutes versus the same day versus in the next couple of days? One of the huge complaints across almost all employee things on recruiting is candidates feel like employers aren't responding to them. So think about that speed. How does that work? The other thing we saw, especially with Gen Z again, was scheduling interviews is a challenge. And you probably see this when you get ghosted for interviews. They're just not used to doing that. It's not a mindset. They're used to instant communication. So if you've got somebody who's applying for that job, do you have the ability to actually chat with them right away and send them a text message or send them a message on their phone through an app or something to get that candidate engaged? And then can you, instead of setting up an interview and scheduling something for days out, can you actually open up a video conference with them right away? We're doing a video conference today. We're all getting used to that. That's available on the mobile phone. How do you quickly engage with that candidate? Make the decision now and get them on board. So again, in that competition sense, work every day to build that team. they expect more from the hiring process. It used to be a little bit about the employer, hey, I'm offering you a job. Now it's a little bit the opposite. The candidate saying, hey, here, this is what I'm bringing to you. So think about that as you're talking to them and what you're doing, those values we talked about earlier, and then include ongoing learning process. So we're going to talk about that just a little bit more. So a couple of studies that we looked at when we were looking at this industry, one of them was a Harvard study that said that there's a lot of opportunities out there and companies are failing based on their recruiting practices. So if an employer, and we've seen some companies, particularly the bigger national companies tend to do this, they automate things to the degree that the decision or the platform is making decisions on their behalf, and the hiring software is unnecessarily screening out candidates. So I would say we love automation. We're a technology company. We think automation is really important, but think hard about how you're applying that automation, and is that automation actually driving candidates away before you have a chance to engage with them? When we think about the workforce, and this is probably reflective of both the unemployment rate right now, as well as the engaged workforce that are applying for work, what are the hidden workforces out there that you can tap into? So when you're talking about interviewing people or talking about connecting to people, thinking about people that are missing hours. In other words, they've already got a part-time job. They're looking for a job on Saturdays to fill in some extra pay or something. Maybe, and we see this actually between retail and restaurants. Maybe they work a retail job for 5 days of the week, but they work in restaurants on the weekend kind of thing. So think about how do you fill in missing hours and create an opportunity for somebody to fill in missing hours. Think about candidates that are missing from work. It's always surprising to us how often we see somebody that says, well, they haven't worked for a while, so I don't like that candidate. That must be an issue. But we think that there's actually an opportunity there, that those candidates are hidden and really can become great candidates, especially if you give them an opportunity. And missing from the workforce is one of those where you really have to start to go out to thinking about other channels to engaging with those candidates, whether it's through social groups or church groups or other ways to engage, to find candidates that aren't even really looking and not actively seeking employment, but they take employment under the right circumstances. And sometimes that can be as simple as doing QR code posters in your locations to make sure that the people that are coming in your door see an opportunity to work there. Your best customers are sometimes you're also your best candidates. So when we think about candidates, and this was another piece of data from Harvard, really think about the hiring process. And typically, we've all sort of grown up with a process that was, what are you bringing to me, and how do I use that inside the organization for this job? But we don't want to have processes where we focus on what they don't have. I've always been an advocate for, I want to find great people. I don't care what their skill sets are, quite frankly. I want to find great people. I want to find people that are communicative, that I can work with, that I can train, I can move through the process. I'm focused much more on, will that person be an amazing person on my team? That's great. We can train them. We can build them skill sets and move them along. So focus on what they're bringing in, which is the ability to be a member of your team versus necessarily all of the other details or specific requirements. Here's one I'll throw at that's a little bit more controversial. Companies that have been in this and been doing it for years now, a concept called open hiring. Open hiring is the concept that says, you know what, we're spending too much time trying to vet these people and sort through candidates. We're going to give work opportunities to people that walk in the door and say they want to work here. And then we're going to let them prove that they can be successful here. And so these two organizations, both, and if you look at research on this, there's some really interesting studies on Greyston Bakery and the Body Shop that they've done on open hiring, where essentially they say, hey, if you walk in and say you want a job, we're going to give you a job, then we're going to show how, as a company, we're going to move you along, but we're also going to expect you to deliver on that job. And the last time I looked at Greyston Bakeries, they're a bakery in New York City. They had something like a 12-month waiting list of candidates that wanted to go and try and work there. So they've created a whole different perspective of their role in hiring people and serving the community, but also finding candidates that will take that job. And the beauty of open hiring is really that if you give a candidate a chance and they are successful, they become very sticky. They become very grateful for that opportunity. So it's a different way to think about it. So when we think about open hiring benefits, improved retention because they're grateful for that opportunity. It does very often improve diversity in your workforce if that's something you're focused on. And it's fast, right? When you're looking at open hiring, that's there. So I know this is a bit of a controversial one, but I wanted to throw it out there because I want to challenge you to think about your recruiting process and how you're approaching it, not just whether it's the technology or whatever else that you've got going on. So once we've got that candidate and we're thinking about that candidate and building an engaged workforce, I go back to that earlier comment that I had about candidates and social media and social interaction. I would ask you to think about how are you engaging with your employees on a real day-to-day basis. I'm still surprised. I talked to an employer not long ago, and they still put schedules up on a bulletin board, and people have to call in and ask somebody when their schedule is coming up. That obviously just doesn't work for Gen Z. They're kind of surprised by that kind of approach. So think about the tools that you've got for communicating with your workforce, whether it's text and chat, whether it's using video calls with them. How do you engage with them on an ongoing basis? How do you create team communications that they can interact with? And then when you're thinking about team communications, and I'd encourage you to make sure you're thinking about it on mobile devices, think about the difference between a business content focus versus staff content focus. And what I mean by that is business content, information about your organization, what's coming up, what specials you've got coming up, what events you're going to participate in locally and so on, versus staff content. Hey, I need you in this Saturday and so on. So think about both sets of communication to try and drive home the ability for that person to engage with your business. We saw, for instance, Walmart gave hundreds of thousands of employees phones, mobile phones, because they wanted them to be engaged and communicate with their company. They wanted to use them on the floor for doing some of the things that they were doing on the floor, but they also wanted them to use to get their schedules and do other things. I once was at a seminar with Google, and one of the senior executives there said, you know, it's surprising to him the number of employers where the employee is putting their mobile phone in a locker before they go out and engage with the customers. They're putting more technology in the locker than the employer was giving them on the floor to do their job. So think about how that plays for you and what you can do. When you're using mobile content and when you're using content to engage with your employees, the other thing we've seen is companies that said, well, that means I've got to get video people and create a video or whatever. We did a test one time where we did a corporate video for something, and then we did a video where somebody took a cell phone and went and talked to somebody on the floor and just started engaging with them in a thing and posted it. And the one that was created that was just a quick blurb on a mobile phone was much more responsive. And we see this all the time. Actually, the Restaurant Association is doing an amazing job at that. We see their posts all the time. We saw posts over the last couple of days as they were engaged at a conference. And those are the kind of things that candidates are looking for from you. Part of the recruiting process, but also part of the engaged workforce and retention process is really thinking about those learning opportunities. So I would encourage you to investigate if you're familiar with ProStart or ServSafe or Search Success, those programs that are run by the association. Kate and the team at the association certainly have lots of ways to help you engage your workforce in industry-specific training that helps them move from having a job to having a career. And whether that's ProStart and it's high school candidates who are just coming into the industry that you want to tap into, they've already shown an interest in the industry. We want to get them engaged with our employers, or whether it's ServSafe or Serve Success as training programs to help them create career training and advance their career. So I would really encourage you to make sure you're aware of these programs and you're participating in these programs with your employees. So that's kind of the quick run through. I know that was an awful lot of slides and content today, but really the workforce statistics really say the big take home here is we've got an ongoing challenge. The unemployment rate is going to stay low, presumably the rest of this year. We don't see anything that's going to change there. It's not changed over the last few years. We've had this challenge about pipeline and bringing people into our industry. We're going to have to think really hard about how to do it. On the recruiting challenge, really think about your process, not just from the perspective of the employer and what that happens for your recruiting managers, but how does that reflect on worker expectations and engaging that workforce? Think about training opportunities, inclusive values of your company and how that engages. So that's the end of the formal part here. Kate, I'm going to say I have no idea whether you've got questions or comments in there. How are we doing?
We are good on questions right now. We will go ahead and open it up if there's any questions that you've thought of while you're listening to all of the content from today. You can go ahead and throw it in the chat. Oh, I see one in the Q&A now. It says, do you see potential immigration challenges causing disruptions?
And I'm sorry, Kate, can you repeat that to me?
Sure. Do you see potential immigration challenges causing disruptions?
Yes, absolutely. We've seen that conversation over the last few weeks. I think it's twofold or threefold. I think obviously, as an employer, you want to make sure you've got the right people in your organization, and I'm not going to move away from that. But on the other side of the coin, what it's done is it's created both, if the numbers hold true and the numbers continue to grow, that's taking away employers' ability to bring people into the industry. Obviously, new immigrants into the country, whether it's legal or illegal, new immigrants into the country very often are looking for those entry-level jobs, and the restaurant industry is certainly an entry-level employer. I think the other impact that I'm starting to see articles on in the last couple of days is just the number of organizations where they're seeing other employees. If somebody went in and took ICE went in and took an employee out of an organization, then all of a sudden the next day, three other employees don't show up because they're nervous. So I would, always encourage you to make sure that you've got, legitimate employees that have work permits and all the rest of that there. But regardless, we know that the restaurant hospitality industry is entry-level employment, and that's going to continue to be impacted by this immigration. The other side of the coin to think about is more long-term and strategic. With this noise level, and we saw this a few years ago when this was a big push, the pipeline of legal immigrants coming into the country also decreased. So when you have this sort of level of noise and conversation going on, then what we see is legal immigration also drops. And I think this year and last year, the number of legal immigrant permits that are being issued is continuing to decline. So it's going to be a challenge. We have to find ways to get our existing workforce, our high school students that are interested in employment opportunities in the industry, and get them into the industry.
Thank you so very much. I was trying to type all that in the answer, so that'll be there as well. And any other questions from the group before we wrap up today?
All right. Well, I'll move forward and do a quick wrap up on a couple of slides. So as you think about this, one of the reasons we're doing this is obviously to create content for you and have you understand the challenges and some of the things you can do about it in your business. We have been working with the association over the last year to create the new jobs platform for the association. And so, we don't want to just say this is something we should be doing. We want to create an opportunity to help create a platform that helps get workers into the industry and helps workers progress through the industry. So we've worked with the association to create a great platform and a discount fee for you. You can find it on the website, and I'm sure you've seen it in the communications coming out. Very simple to get engaged with the platform and work through the association's platform. We've got a number of different plans out there that you can get in, and it's quick and easy to get in. The goal here is really to create a Ohio candidate pool that we can all leverage here. And it's going to take some time to do it. It's not an overnight process, but we want to change the process so that candidates understand if they're looking for a restaurant or hospitality job, this is the place to go in Ohio and get it done. And so there are some simple plans that you can participate in. When the materials come out, you'll be able to see this link and participate in those plans. So I know Kate will send out these materials to everybody. There's really quick ways to do it, and I didn't include it on here, but Kate, you're welcome to send my email address out with everything as well. And I'm always happy to take either questions or give any assistance or talk to your teams.
Well, thank you so much for all of the great information today. And I hope all of those who are on the call today were able to find a couple nuggets that they can use today and going forward, join our community. So thank you all again for the time. And you will be receiving just a recap email from us shortly. Thank you all.
Thanks
Have
very
a
much.
great Wednesday.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.